All right, let's be honest. If you're going through menopause, you might be wondering, did my desire just hit the pause button? But here's the thing, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there waiting for you to discover it in new ways. Today, we're diving into how menopause can shift desire and how you can spark it back up no matter what changes your body is going through. Get ready for some refreshing insights, light bulb moments, and maybe a few ideas to rekindle that fire. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to inspiring midlife women to feel more connected to their bodies, pleasure, and power through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexuality coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. Our guest is the incredible Dr. Kelly Casperson, urologist, sexual medicine expert, international speaker, top-rated podcaster, and author of the best-selling book, You Are Not Broken, Stop Shooting All Over Your Sex Life. Dr. Kelly combines humor, candor, and cutting-edge science to dismantle myths around female sexuality and to empower us with the knowledge we need to thrive in our relationships and intimacy, particularly during the menopause transition. From breaking down the science of desire, responsive versus spontaneous, to her tireless activism for vaginal estrogen access, Dr. Kelly is changing the conversation around women's sexual health. She's passionate about providing the resources and education women need to truly live their best lives. And today she's here to share her expertise with us. So whether you've ever wondered why desire seems to ebb and flow, or you're looking for practical tips to ignite your sexual spark, this episode is packed with insights that will leave you feeling informed and inspired. Let's welcome Dr. Kelly Casperson. Welcome, Dr. Casperson.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Such an honor to have you. This is the World Menopause Awareness Month. You Are Not Broken edition. That's what I've declared this episode. And of course, you are the perfect expert to help us understand what is really happening to our sex lives during the menopause transition. You are a urologist, a surgeon, a sexual medicine expert, TEDx speaker. Your best-selling book, which I have right here, You Are Not Broken, Stop Shitting All Over Your Sex Life, has just been re-released and is hitting the top of the Amazon charts. I would love for you to share with our listeners, how did you get here into this unique space of midlife, sexuality, hormones? And were you always this comfortable talking about sex?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually raised Catholic, so sex was like a super taboo for us. You know, it was something you just did not do until you got married. And I was just a very curious kid, which I think has kept going in my life of like, if an adult says no, I'm like, why? You know, what is this? What is this thing? So I was always kind of innately curious about this big taboo that we weren't allowed to do. I mean, the Virgin Mary was a virgin, right? Like pretty interesting upbringing. So went to medical school, became a urologist. Urologists are experts in the pelvis, pelvic surgery, kidneys, bladder, male sexual function, penis health. Viagra came on the market in 1998 in America. It's the most well-known drug by shape and color in the world. And about 7 years into practice, a woman changed my life. She had low desire, and I didn't know how to help her. And all the myths that I was taught kind of came bubbling up of women are too difficult. We'll never figure them out. Don't worry. The gynecologists are taking care of them. And all of these things I was taught kept coming to the surface, and I just challenged them. I'm like, is it true? Is it true we don't know anything? Is it true the gynecologists are taking care of the women in regards to sex? And really looking into what does the research say, you know, and understanding sexuality that doesn't exist in a bubble. Everything we do in our life is telling us if it's good or not to have sex, whether that's Hollywood, our religion, our parents, our ex-boyfriend, and what society says a good woman does as far as her ability to desire or pleasure herself. And then I always joke that sex got me into menopause because everybody's like, yeah, but you know what happens to your sex life after menopause? And that kept coming up, like, yeah, but. And I'm like, what's yeah, but? Like, what is the data on hormones and sex and your ability to have sex after menopause? And realize there's a big myth there also, and a big miseducation when it comes to, are hormones important for anything besides hot flashes? Right. And really got into the hormones and just stayed curious. I'm like, why are we so afraid? What are hormones good for? What does the science say? Why are only 2% of women in America on hormones if they're so beneficial? And just my podcast and my platform has expanded, not only because I think hormones are fascinating, but because truthfully in this world, like it's still very sensitive for me to talk about intimacy on Instagram. And there's
Mhm.
plenty of people who've gotten kicked off of those platforms for talking about anatomic body parts and education. So I tend to lean towards more hormone education on those platforms for safety more than anything else. And that's why podcasts are so amazing because you can still talk about sexual education without fear of, having your whole account canceled.
And you've been an inspiration in my own podcasting journey. So thank you for trailblazing the way for having these conversations and normalizing these conversations and debunking all the myths. And you do a brilliant job of turning to the science. I love that in your book that you start with desire. Desire and libido get mixed up. They get used quite a bit. I've heard stats like from 50 to 68% to 70% of women going through perimenopause and menopause report experiencing low libido. What exactly are we talking about when we say the word libido? And should we be
Yeah.
saying desire instead?
Well, if we can blame Freud. Freud messed up a lot of things, but Freud basically said that the desire for sex was an innate survival drive, kind of like eating, drinking, sleeping, right? And that's where kind of the libido came from, is this innate drive to have sex.
Mhm.
And although our species needs sex in order to reproduce and keep being a species, humans don't need to reproduce in order to survive, right? So it's very unlike water, food, sleep, because the less you have those things, the more you desire them. That's not how sex works at all. For many people, the less sex you have, the less you desire it. Again, not for everybody, but it's not everybody's lived experience that they want it more and more and more, the less they have it, right? So sometimes the more you have it, the more you want it. So libido, the point is, it's not an innate drive. It kind of gets stereotyped. And that's one of the shoulds of women of you should
Mhm.
just want to have sex all the time. You should just be able to be turned on no matter what. You should be wanting sex after a long day at work with taking care of the kids, managing the household, having an argument with your partner. You should still want to have sex with them, right? Of like, no, that's not how normal bodies work. So libido and desire get looped in. And then the other thing with desire is the stereotype that it must always be spontaneous. Certainly, that's what Hollywood tells us. That's what the top 10 country hits tell us, that if you do not have spontaneous desire, you are broken. But Rosemary Basson and other sex researchers, they've kind of broken this like linear sex starts with desire model into have work on prioritizing good sex, intimacy, the relationship that you want. Go have good sex. The desire might happen before, it might happen during, it might happen after. And a lot of women's lived experience is responsive desire, meaning you have to be put in a context that is safe and promotes sexuality to allow your desire for sex to happen. Nobody got taught that because we got really crappy sex education, right? We got disease and pregnancy prevention plans, not how does your body work? How do you communicate about awkward things? And how do you cultivate a safe environment where you actually can safely have intercourse?
I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. I want to go back to this word desire that you start off with in your book. I want to just read something from your book, which I found very impactful, the way you start talking about desire. You write that desire is both a noun and a verb. As a noun, it means an impulse towards something that promises enjoyment or satisfaction in its attainment. As a verb, it means a strong wish for or want of something. I feel there's such a huge gap, and you talk about this, right? Between men and women in the way we are conditioned to not own or voice our desires. And this perpetuates this belief that I'm not worthy of desiring. And this has a knock on effect on how we show up in the bedroom, in our relationships, in work, in life. You say that society got it totally wrong with desire. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, society really puts us in a box, right? Especially women. Everybody gets put in a box, right? The way that we're talking about sex is not good for men and either. But certainly women get put in this box of like only women who look a certain way are allowed to receive pleasure. Only women maybe who are a certain age are allowed to enjoy sex. We're just putting people in a box of who's allowed to desire and who's allowed to be desired, right? We have like all these, and again, these are unspoken rules. They're not printed out anywhere. But certainly when women compare, one big thing that we know affects women's sexual desire is how closely she thinks she matches up to the ever changing mood of what a good looking woman is.
And in your experience, when you're meeting women in your clinic, like that woman who first came and said, I'm experiencing low desire, what were her thoughts around this experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people's stereotype of they just think sex exists in this bubble. Like you're supposed to want sex all the time, and the sex you have is supposed to be great without any sort of like learning, trying, communicating. Like this takes work. It is a skill. Right? But we're not taught that. We're taught like sex is supposed to be very natural. You're not supposed to like try and fail. You're just supposed to automatically know how to turn your partner on. Like there's so many unwritten rules that get in the way of us learning how to have good sex in our life. Peggy Kleinplatz wrote an amazing book called Magnificent Sex. And in it, she basically researched these people. She's a researcher. She's basically like, who has great sex? And these people were like, I have great sex. And she's like, can I talk to you? Right? So she basically interviewed them. Nowhere in like their top 10 of why they're people who have great sex is desire for sex even included. Nobody's sitting
Mm.
around waiting to desire sex before they go have a good sex life. And I think so many, especially women, are stuck there. They're like, if only I desired sex, then I'd have a good sex life. And that's why, one of the chapters of my book is called F Desire, is like, why don't you just go work on prioritizing communication and intimacy and sexual activity that's pleasurable equally if you're partnered? And don't even worry about like, do I have enough desire? Do I have not enough desire? What, like when people get obsessed about this desire thing and lose track of like, it's not actually a necessary ingredient. It's nice to have. I'm
Mm.
not saying discard it completely, but just breaking apart people's linear views that desire has to be somehow coming first or fixed first before a great sex life can happen. And I think the other thing about desire in women is we're trying to fix women's desire all the time, and we're paying no heed to the fact of are they actually having pain-free, comfortable, pleasurable sex in the first place, right? Are we trying to make them desire mushy broccoli? Can we work on the meal? Right? And if we work on the meal and you're like, well, you like the meal now. Okay, well, let's not worry if you're desiring the meal then. Let's just go have the wonderful meal that you have. But I can't make you desire mushy broccoli.
I love that. I know that that study by Dr. Kleinplatz looked at couples in their 60s, so midlife couples. I know many women struggle to understand why their desire has suddenly hit pause in midlife. And I know in your TED Talk and in your book, you refer to the biopsychosocial model. I think it's a really helpful lens to look through in terms of self-identifying potential reasons, right, for why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. Can you walk us through the biopsychosocial model,
Yeah.
please?
So biopsychosocial stands for biology, psychology, and sociology, right? So biology is hormones. How's your tissue? How's your pelvic floor? Is sex painful? Kind of like the mechanics, right? Like, does the car have all its pieces? So if any of that's wrong, that's not going to be working well. Psycho is the brain, right? Body image can play immensely into here. Stress, anxiety plays a huge role on our interest in sex, our ability to achieve pleasure. And then social is sociology. How were you socialized as a woman? Were you allowed to touch your body? Are you allowed to say the names of your body parts without that being taken off the internet? Right. So our ability to be seen as humans with human body parts that can be acknowledged. Who's got the power in your relationship? Who gets to
Mm.
decide how much sex is enough? Unequal distribution of labor in the home. That affects desire. Right. So the sociology, the bubble in which we live. Who gets to be a woman who gets to be desired? What does she look like? How much does she earn? How young is she? Right? So it's basically the unwritten rules of existing in a society that has sex both as a unachievable attainment and also as a huge stigma and shame.
And once we know all these factors, right? I went through that. I remember when I read your book the first time and learned about this biopsychosocial model. When you go through that exercise of looking at all those pieces, it's just such a relief to know that there are things that I can do. There are things that I can literally take it into my own hands. And this too shall pass, this feeling of like, oh, I'm not feeling like I'm in the mood. I can look at all these different factors. It's not really about me. I am not broken. But then we are faced with the discrepancy in desire with our partners. And that also can feel so frustrating. And can you share with us how the menopause or midlife transition affect the balance between what you referred to earlier as spontaneous and responsive desire? And how do these two types of desire impact sexual relationships?
Yeah. So lots to unpack there. First of all, desire mismatch. Stereotypically, in a heterosexual relationship, the man's desire for sex is considered the default. His is the correct one, right? So she's wrong no matter what. She either has too much desire or not enough desire. And so they really, cycle that woman around this male default, which in and of itself is problematic. Who gets to say that his level of desire is the right level of desire? And really, the experts discuss desire mismatch in terms of this is a couple's problem. This is not one person's problem. How much does the relationship need for the relationship to be thriving and healthy? Not what does he need, not what does she need, or they, whatever. But is stereotypically in the heterosexual relationship, this is where it kind of ramps up. If you think about it, nobody else agrees about anything consistently and anywhere else. What do you want to do for dinner tonight? What type of movies do we like to watch? How much do you want to exercise? How much do you want to see my in-laws? Right? Like these are things to be navigated in any relationship, but we've taken sex and made it so untalkable, right? Like how are you, we don't even get taught how to talk about sex. So like this one thing, which is a discrepancy, which everything else in your relationship is also a discrepancy, but you navigate it, you got to navigate this, right? And the first thing is don't blame one person. This is a relationship issue. What's good for the relationship? Because certainly if, again, stereotypically, but man brings in a woman and says, fix her desire. It's like,
Mhm.
why do you want, that's an unsupportive partner. He thinks you're the problem. Of course you wouldn't want to sleep with him, right? Like when sex is a chore or on a to-do list, your desire is completely out the window. So
Mm.
lots to just educate people on because the default is to think that you're the broken one. There's something wrong with you. If only we change you, then the world will be better. Instead of saying education is the way to understand this very complex topic. And then getting
Mm.
into your question about menopause. Well, with menopause, we have a lowering of testosterone, we have a lowering of estrogen. Certainly, we have a lowering of progesterone, but there's less data on sex and progesterone. But they're both hormones of desire. I mean, I throw an estrogen patch on some women and they're like, I'm good. Holy moly. Like my desire is back. And a lot of what hormones do is they make you feel like yourself again. And making you feel like yourself is not insubstantial in your desire for sex, right? Like if you don't feel like yourself, it's hard for you to exercise. It's hard for you to eat healthy. It's hard for you to, want to desire sex. So feeling like yourself, incredibly important. We have data that shows, at least in perimenopause, about 60% of women will say they do not feel like themselves. So profound hormone changes. Again, a lot of people don't know that. They just think it means no more periods. They have no idea what's happening on the inside in regards to these significant hormone shifts.
And again, turning to that biopsychosocial model and understanding this difference, right, between responsive and spontaneous desire, I think can help us get us a little bit closer to understanding our own unique blueprint, right, for our own personal sexual expression. You advocate for in the book starting a self cultivation practice. You can see it as self pleasure. You can refer to it as masturbation. I love the way that you refer to it as self cultivation. Can you talk to us? What does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing is where in your day do you have anything that pleases you? And I mean, not sexually,
Mhm.
because I think so many people I think we're busy, right? It's to do, to do, to do, to do, to do. What's on the to do list for tomorrow that I didn't get done today? Right? Instead of realizing like you have the innate ability to have time for pleasure whenever you want, like nature, a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, sitting on a couch with your favorite blanket, ice cream, like, music, just enjoying being in the human body and enjoying what exists in the world. And if you don't desire anything, you don't have pleasure in anything, why do you think sex would exist in a bubble? Right? So really cultivating, this feels good. This me stroking my arm feels good. Me putting on this shirt because it's silky feels good, right? Like how are you enjoying pleasure in the body non-sexually? And then you bring it in
Mhm.
sexually, right? But I think that's completely neglected of like, we're like too busy to be bothered, and that's just extra. And then and you want an amazing sex life? An amazing sex life is you enjoying pleasure. That's what sex is. It's incredibly pleasurable, right? So if you have none of that in your life, start working on that. Maybe
Mhm.
non-sexually first.
Yeah, I love that. I love starting with just those small little things that, light you up, bring a smile to your face. And they don't have to involve the genitals. I know you had a post recently on your Instagram. You were citing an article where masturbation was being recommended or prescribed to relieve menopausal symptoms. And there was just an uproar from your community because yeah, women just cannot go there, especially when they're experiencing all of the symptoms of menopause or they're just not feeling like themselves. Just going straight to a masturbation practice just doesn't work for some.
It's a
So
lot.
many,
It's a
it's
big
a lot.
lift,
It's
right?
a big
It was
lift.
an interesting post because first of all, it was written by a man.
Mm.
And, it's stereotypically men are, if not encouraged, at least accepted that masturbation is very normal and natural to them, right? Whereas women are not taught that in our society. So for a man who has easy access to masturbation to tell women to masturbate, it was like, you don't even know how we've been socialized, do you? Right.
Mhm.
And then number two is like, do you think in a 10-minute doctor visit, the doctor should lead with treating menopause symptoms with masturbation? Like, tell me any instance that that's going to go well. So, yeah, it was a very interesting article for all of those reasons. But yeah, I mean, masturbation's great. Releases endorphins, it decreases stress, it helps with pain, it helps with sleep, right? So like there's tons of reasons to masturbate, but if you don't realize the shame that's put on women that you can even enjoy the body that you were born in, like it's a heavy lift to say that that's the treatment for hot flashes.
So starting there, starting with small practices where you can really start to experience those small, simple, everyday pleasures, training your brain to experience that and to realize, yes, I can experience pleasure in these small moments. And then perhaps seeing where that can lead you or perhaps that can expand your ability or capacity to experience pleasure in other ways. I know you in your book, you say the brain plays a big role in sexual desire. How can we harness our mindsets to support this idea of like, yes, I can experience pleasure, yes, in the small ways, but yeah, I can go there. I can go and experience more positive sexual experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is start paying attention to your thoughts, right?
Mm.
Thoughts are just thoughts. A lot of our thoughts aren't chosen. They're just on rerun, right? They're well-worn paths. They might be put there by society or us when we were 23 or an ex-boyfriend or judgy consumerist capitalist society who says you must buy and purchase and change your body and be perfect and don't smell and right? Like all of this stuff we got put in our brains. Just be aware of it. Be aware of what comes up when you think about sex. Be aware of what comes up when you think about your partner. Be aware of what comes up when you think about your body, right? And then once you start seeing those thoughts, you get to be like, those are optional, right? Are they serving me? Are they helping me have a great sex life or are they holding me back? Right? And that's really the power of mind work and coaching of like your brain is your biggest sex organ. If you have negative thoughts about sex, you have negative body image, you have negative thoughts about your partner, great sex cannot exist in that bubble. You got to clean out the cobwebs. And so, and even in that, and that's why I talk about that of who do we allow to be sexual? See what comes up in your brain and then understand that thoughts are optional and they serve us or they hold us back. And we can start discarding some of those limiting beliefs, those shoulds that are holding us back from a great sex life, if that's what we want. I mean, I'm here, I'm like, I'm never here to tell everybody to have an amazing sex life against your will, right? Like, this is like, if you want to, you can practice at this, but nowhere do the experts say, "Oh, I was just born being an amazing lover," right? It's a skill.
And what I feel that what you're advocating for, looking for at our thoughts, looking at our conditioning, that this just dipping our toes into this body of pleasure or body of sexuality, just starting to dip our toes can be such a transformative personal development journey, right? Because that's where all that stuff gets unearthed, all of those
I mean, isn't
beliefs.
isn't that the whole point,
Yeah.
right? Like, what better thing to do in midlife than to learn to be curious again? Learn to
Mm.
question the status quo, learn to question everything you thought you knew. Learn to advocate for yourself. Learn to prioritize time for yourself. This literally is the last frontier of personal growth because the skills that you use in learning how to communicate and learning how to prioritize what you want to create, that spills over into the rest of your life.
And you say communication is lubrication. You have a whole chapter dedicated to communication. Can you share with us if we've been held back with some of these limiting beliefs and conditioning, and we start to work through them in the way that you advise us to do, how do we then start broaching that topic with a partner?
Yeah, so don't do it. I have a more don'ts than do's of don't do it right after a failed sexual event, right?
Mm.
Naked and vulnerable and like failing is not the time to be like, can we rethink this whole thing? Right? Being on a walk is very safe. The eyes scanning the horizon, not having direct eye contact. Walking is a very safe place to bring things up. Bring up things you've been learning. I was listening on this podcast that maybe everything we've been taught about sexuality has been wrong. And maybe that's why so many people are kind of hung up. Bringing up stuff you've learned, like, oh my gosh, did you know that the rate of orgasm for women in a heterosexual relationship is only 60%? Just bring up facts of like, oh, I had no idea that all of my body changes in menopause, including my genitals and my bladder and my vagina. Like, I had no idea. So you just start bringing up things you're talking about, right? And I think so many people are like, we have to have one conversation and then it's over. No, ideally, you're going to talk about this when it's good, right? You know what I really
Mhm.
love about my intimacy with you? It's that when X, Y, and Z, I feel really safe. So talking about the good stuff as a platform for when it goes bad, because inevitably it's going to go bad. Somebody's going to get sick. Kids are going to have issues. You're going to have to take care of a parent, money stresses, like what erectile dysfunction. Like it's going to get bad. Talk about it when it's good because now you've got a baseline of us talking about our sex life for when the shit hits the fan.
And you say introducing novelty and curiosity is so important. Can you share some practical ways we can incorporate these elements into our relationships to keep stoking that desire that's there, right? It's there, but it's just dormant. And so how can
Yeah,
we
well, I mean,
right.
it our brains mess us up because our brains really like routine. Get up at the same time, have the same cup of coffee, work out at the same time, throw on the same workout sweats, shower at the same time. Like our body loves routine, and at the same time, novelty is what stokes desire and curiosity. And so really that's where Esther Perel, the amazing psychotherapist comes in being like, "Listen, if you're picking a long-term monogamous relationship, you're picking routine. That's a killer for spontaneity and desire. You have to cultivate it then because you don't get that if you pick this unless you work on it." Right. And I think where a lot of people get led astray is they're like, oh, that means you should like hang from the rafters and have 20 different pieces of lingerie and 40 different vibrators. It's like, no, just maybe don't do it at the exact same time in the exact same position in the exact same way with the exact same lube all the time. It doesn't take a lot for the brain to be like, this is different than last time, right? So really encouraging novelty and creativity within the constraints of don't do anything you don't feel comfortable with. And you don't have to like get rid of your relationship to have the brain be like, oh, this is a little bit different than last time. Cool. I'm
Mhm.
paying attention a little bit better now.
Yeah, I love that in your book you suggest that couples make a list, their own individual lists on their own about the things that they desire, the things that they may want to try sexually, and then to compare those lists and see where they can meet each other, right? In terms of satisfying each other's desires or trying new and novel things. And sometimes it just requires, I feel like, if an idea feels a little bit too out there, it requires that intimate, vulnerable conversation and really creating that safe space. We hear a lot about creating that safe space, but it does require that, right?
Yeah.
Really coming into that safe presence with another to try something new, right? And so, how do we start dipping into territory that feels very new, very different for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so under acknowledged the importance of safety and connection before
Mhm.
you try new things. And I think, I see it backfire when someone's like, "I tried X, Y, and Z because my partner wanted to, and I wasn't okay with it." And it's like, okay, in an ideal world, you're gonna discuss this and not do it if you're not okay with it, right? Or talk about it afterwards if you're not okay with it, because I don't want you to build resentment towards things. So really this role, and again, this is the sex education we never got, is like, how do you build connection and safety before? So people are like, "Oh, intimacy is the sex." No, the sex exists within the intimacy and the connection, right? And so it's like, not understating the importance of saying, "You know what? I don't feel really connected right now, and I wanna feel more connected before I feel safe to have sex," needs to happen more often. And
Mm,
in the sex talk, because I'm talking a lot about how to communicate, right? Of like, don't underestimate the role of being a good listener,
mm,
right? Because so much of us like, don't just think about what you're gonna say next. Listen, repeat back, make sure you're understand. Am I understanding this correctly? Let me check, right? Like the role of being a good listener in in providing that safe space for your partner to be like, sometimes my penis doesn't work all the time. And I worry that you're gonna think I'm less of a man. Right? That's an
mm,
incredibly vulnerable thing for a man to say, incredibly
mm.
vulnerable. But it's like, if you don't talk about it, she's gonna assume things, he's gonna assume things. Now you're just existing on assumptions. That's the worst way to run a relationship.
Absolutely. And having also the, feeling that we don't have to go into the sex act, that penetration can be taken off the table or out of the bedroom completely. I think just having that as a starting point. You talk a lot about the book about P and V and how that's been considered the norm. I don't think that we realize like there are other ways to go about this, right? There are other ways to experience pleasure. It doesn't have to involve penetration. And there's a whole world of pleasure waiting for you when you embark in that curious and exploration of what else is possible, of creating that time, that playtime to be curious and explore.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the failure of sex education, right? Like, what do we
Mhm,
get taught? We get taught to put the condom on the banana, and this is how pregnancy happens. So we get taught that sex is putting a penis in a vagina, right? We don't get taught that sex is about connection, it's about pleasure, it's about trial and error, it's about communicating. Like, we're like, oh, we put the penis in the vagina. And like the blank stares that I'm met with when stuff goes wrong with the vagina and stuff goes wrong with the penis, and couples are ultimately feeling very broken because they don't know anything else exists. And I'm like, well, is the point to have sex or is the point just to put a penis in a vagina? Right. And
mm.
so many people don't understand that those are two very different things.
And if we do wanna go there, right? If we do wanna have P and V sex, and we just feel that despite all our best efforts, we're doing all the things that you've outlined here in your book, we've gotten all the education, but still nothing seems to improve our wanting to have sex, our desire. You talk about in the book considering seeking help for hypoactive sexual desire disorder. How does that fit into the picture? And can you give our listeners a clear understanding of what HSDD is and how it's diagnosed and what treatment options are available?
Yeah. So, we've already talked about saying great sex, it can exist without a spontaneous desire for sex.
Mhm.
Right. But HSDD is literally the dopamine is low in your brain. So, like, I have a great relationship. I don't have pain. Everything else seems to be doing pretty well. but, like, it is just gray. The idea of sex is just really gray to me. Really that wanting to want, kind of to turn back on the brain. We do it by increasing dopamine in the brain. There's 2 medications that are currently FDA approved for hypoactive sexual desire disorder for women in America, currently premenopausal only, but that will be changing. Addie, which is the drug name flubanserin, and then Vyleesi, which is the drug generic name is bremelanotide. And they both work by increasing dopamine in the brain. And testosterone actually works by helping mediate dopamine in the brain, but is different and is not FDA approved. So these drugs don't work for everybody, probably about 60% of people. I always make sure they understand biopsychosocial, responsive desire, sex worth desiring, right? Like these basic adult sex ed 101 to understand before you try to take a pill to solve something that education can solve. But if they've read my book and they get it and they want to give it a try, there is no reason that people can't try these medications.
And in terms of medications or hormone therapies for menopausal or postmenopausal women, is there anything currently
Yeah, they
available?
can take all these medications off label. They're not
Okay.
dangerous for them. You might struggle with insurance. But remember, the FDA separated women into premenopausal and postmenopausal for the purpose of these drugs. They've never done that with any other drug before. So there's probably a pretty big bias. We know that these medications work in postmenopausal, just that your FDA threw a line in the sand with this. So they have to change that. But just understand it's not because the medications are unsafe, and it's not because the medications don't work.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that. And then there's the role of vaginal estrogen. We've talked about vaginal estrogen here on the show before with your incredible colleagues, Dr. Maria Uloco and Dr. Rachel Rubin, who've spoken about the benefits of vaginal estrogen. I don't think we can talk enough about it. And, Dr. Rubin says it's the female version of Viagra. But sadly, I hear stories from women that are prescribed it. They have the courage to go and have that conversation with the doctor. They're prescribed it. Then they take the box home, read the box warning label, and just stick it back in their bathroom door for months, and then continue to suffer in silence and just continue to accept this as their new normal. Can you talk to us about how do you coach women to feel more comfortable about using vaginal estrogen? And I know that you're right now currently a huge advocate of a campaign to unbox menopause, a grassroots advocacy effort, which is being led by the national nonprofit Let's Talk Menopause to get the FDA to remove that outdated black box warning from local vaginal estrogen.
Yeah. So in 2002, when the Women's Health Initiative incorrectly said that hormones cause cancer, the FDA created a boxed warning for all estrogen products that has very scary and inaccurate information on it now. It's been 22 years. Most of those fears have been debunked. There's no evidence that local low-dose vaginal estrogen therapy causes dementia, heart disease, blood clots, liver issues, dementia, anything, but the warning still says that. So we've petitioned the FDA to take the box warning off. They have not yet. And so now we're doing a grassroots because we say, hey, women, if you want truth and accuracy, then you need to be part of the solution in getting truth and accuracy in your medical product labeling. And this is a glaring example of where truth and accuracy is not fairly represented on the package insert. So let's talk menopause.org. If you just Google unboxing estrogen, it'll all come up. And you can put the link in your show notes, hopefully, so they can just click on it. If you're a healthcare provider, that's a certain form to send to the FDA. And if you're a lay person, that's another form to send to the FDA. Currently, these are just for USA only. I've heard they don't take international email addresses. But to note, Canada also has the same boxed warning on their vaginal estrogen products as America does. But most of the rest of the world does not have these scary, incorrect labelings.
Okay, and I'll definitely add those links to the show notes. And what do you see in your practice when women start using vaginal estrogen in terms of their wanting to engage sexually with their partners again?
Yeah, well, the big way that vaginal estrogen helps with that is it decreases pain, increases lubrication, increases elasticity, increases blood flow, so arousal, orgasm, right? But classically, it's just improving the tissue quality enough that you're not having uncomfortable, painful sex. So many women stop being intimate because of pain, and they don't know why they're getting pain because so many people don't know that this is a menopause symptom. So many people think menopause is just a hot flash and your periods end. They don't understand the profound changes in your body because of low estrogen and low testosterone.
So you would include that as part of the toolbox of looking at mindset, looking at communication, looking at having a more sort of curious and open mind in terms of exploring sexual pleasure, and then definitely including this as part of like, okay, let's see if this is going to work in helping me feel more comfortable and enjoy sexual pleasure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the bio part, right?
Yes, for sure. Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Casperson. This has been so enlightening. I always finish my conversation with guests asking them, what does pleasure mean to you?
Being in the present moment,
Mm,
which is about as
and
close to a spiritual practice as you can get, right? Many
absolutely.
ancient texts and, Eckhart Tolle and mindfulness is just enjoy the present moment because it's the only experience you can actually ever have. And we
Mm,
spend so much of our time in the past and in the future in our brains. Really, an orgasm is in the present moment. You can't have an orgasm if you're thinking about past and future. So pleasure truly is enjoying the present moment, no matter if it's sexual or not.
that's so beautiful. Thank you so, so much for your time. I can't wait to share this episode in celebration of World Menopause Awareness Month. And where can people find you?
I hang out on Instagram at Kelly Casperson MD, and then my website is kellycaspersonmd.com.
Thank you so much. And your book, You Are Not
You
Broken.
are not broken. Yep, and I have a podcast of the same name.
And that can be, your book is available on Amazon. And
Amazon,
I know
Barnes& and Noble.
your incredible podcast available on all podcasting platforms. Thank you so much again for your time, for your presence. This has been such an illuminating conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review, as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free Pleasure Upgrade Bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.